I'm not gonna try to mess everything up by telling you anything about her. I'm gonna let her do that. So, she's gonna touch on a person that I talked about here a couple of months ago at the end of her program, John Yates Bial. So you might be able to, you know, kind of tie that in whenever she gets to that point there. But anyway, please welcome Ms. Dore Mancini. Well, her husband back there, I think he's gonna be helping out a little bit too.
A little bit.
All righty.
Well,
Okay, what he didn't tell you is that my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Harvey White, is on the back of the Mississippi Monument. He fought under Swiss light artillery. So since it's just over the hill, it means a lot to me to be here and to speak here. The topic that I'm going to talk about tonight is Johnson's Island, but I want to give you a little history about how it came to be a topic for me. It piqued my interest. About 4 years ago, I was able to purchase the collection from Virginia Fraser Boyle, who was a poet laureate of the Confederacy. It included diaries, poems, books, first edition books, all kinds of things. It even included a wreath that was handmade by Jefferson Davis and placed on Virginia's head when she was 10 years old. But part of the story was about her father, Charles Wesley Fraser, who was in the Confederate Army. He was captured at Pelham Gap and sent to Johnson's Island to be imprisoned. And so that piqued my interest. I didn't know anything really about Johnson's Island. So like a rabbit in a hole, you just kind of go all off. But I think it's a really very interesting story all unto itself. And I'm going to pass around some handouts. Some of them are just copied off the internet, but I have a lot of original stuff because I firmly believe that it's more important for you to see the real items because they mean so much more. And all of this stuff came through Virginia's items that I bought. I bought multiple batches of different things. So when the war between the states started, the Union felt like the war wasn't going to last very long. They soon realized that the Southerners were a very determined group of people. They also had to realize that they were going to have to deal with thousands and thousands of Confederate prisoners. Colonel William Hoffman was ordered to establish a prison system to accommodate the POWs. He decided that the Great Lakes area would be a great location because it was far enough to prevent being raided, and the site he chose was a 300-acre island on off the coast of Sandusky, Ohio. It was easily defendable. It had a good source of fresh water and easy access by boat and a rail system that was already in place to accommodate the transportation of the prisoners. The island was inhabited by L.B. Johnson family, and even they had to have permission to come and go from the island. So this is a map that shows the location of Johnson's Island, and this is actually a map that shows the layout of the buildings. And I would hope that you would come back and take a look at this. This is an original lithograph that shows Johnson's Island. This is Colonel McLean, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, but this is a hand-drawn, it's a copy of a hand-drawn layout of the island. In November of 1861, work started on the prison stockade and the barracks at the southeast end of the island. The stockade planks were 14 feet tall and the gate faced the shore. A platform was built along the wall for the guards to use to patrol. 8 feet within the wall was the deadline. There were sentries stationed there 24 hours a day. There was a total of 13 two-story prison blocks constructed, and they were 60 by 24 feet, with block number 6 being used as a hospital. They were in 2 rows with a street in between that was about 150 feet wide, and they slept on narrow bunks with a straw mattress, and by the end of the war they said that the straw was ground to powder. There just was really nothing left. Stairs outside led to the upper level, and there was a wood-burning stove in each one for heat. The sinks/latrines were located directly behind the barracks, and they were 18 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 5 foot deep. It was bitterly cold, often reaching 26 degrees below zero. It also included a blockhouse, and the estimated cost to build the prison was $30,000. Housing for the Union officers and their families was built about 200 yards away outside of the prison walls. There were 40 buildings in the stockade and the house of the 128th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, whose job it was to guard the prison. In the beginning, it was decided that only Confederate officers would be imprisoned at Johnson's Island, but eventually all ranks would be imprisoned. Due to a good supply of cheap labor and material, the 3-acre prison was completed enough to accept prisoners in April of 1862, and the first group of prisoners to arrive came from Fort Donelson and Island number 10. The prison would operate for 40 months, where there were over 10,000 officers, including 25 generals and 1,000 enlisted personnel, spies, civilians, and they had crossed over the Sandusky Bay to the federal docks. Johnson's Island had the lowest mortality rate of any prison. They only lost 203 people due to the harsh Ohio winters and the lack of food and disease. And they were buried in a federally owned cemetery with approximately 20 others that were buried elsewhere on the island. Confinement depended on when a prisoner would arrive. In the beginning, prisoners were exchanged after only 5 months, while those that arrived after Gettysburg in July of 1863 stayed for 12 to 18 months. By 1863 to 1864, there was a slowdown in the exchange of prisoners. The prison was designed for a maximum of 2,500 prisoners, and the average number was 2,000 to 2,500, but it swelled to 3,200 in January of 1865 because they had stopped making prisoner exchanges. One of the reasons was that they were tunneling out, and there was a lot of escape, so they were just trying to punish them and make them behave. There was a book that was written, and it has a valuable amount of information, personal information on Johnson's Island. It's called Poor Johnny's. The first POWs were treated fairly well. They were given the same rations as the guards, although the cuts of meat were less desirable. They could purchase canned goods and fresh fruit and sardines from the sutler, H. Carpenter. But around the spring of 1864, the sutlers were removed under orders from the United States government, and the prisoners could no longer buy food. The daily rations became a loaf of bread twice daily, and it was divided among 8 men. Each man hoped that the infinitesimal difference that would be in their favor. It was insufficient to satisfy the cravings of hunger, and left each man with a little less life and strength in which to fight the battle of the day to come. Coffee was unknown, and on several occasions they received 2 potatoes and an onion, and that was simply to treat them for scurvy. As the months passed on, a marked change became noticeable in the appearance of the men. They became listless, and the parade ground was dotted with gaunt, cadaverous men. with a faraway look in their eye and the hunger and privation showing in every line of their emaciated bodies. It is believed that this treatment was enforced as a retaliatory measure because of the poor conditions seen by Union prisoners, and this belief certainly received strong support. When looking across the bay, they could see a city whose waste alone could have supplied their wants. When they arrived on the island, rats were so numerous that they were a common sight on the parade ground. Later, they disappeared. A favorite dish was rat pie, and it's said to taste just like squirrel. Captain McLean wrote to a friend in New York requesting provisions before the order took effect that he had to figure out how to smuggle the message out. A settler that received some favors from the men in cell block 18 agreed to loan Captain McLean a book, and when it was returned, the letter was hidden in its pages. Soon, a barrel of flour, a barrel of hams, 50 pounds of butter, 50 pounds of lard, and 6 bottles of whiskey arrived. It was taken to Brown Fraley to collect the goods, and while the sergeant poked the barrel of flour and Major Belden searched the barrel of hams, Brown Farley took the opportunity to remove the whiskey from its hiding place and returned before the searchers even realized he was gone. Major Belden agreed to Captain McLean that the whiskey was confiscated by the men who'd handled the express because it was considered contraband. It was said that 75 Southern soldiers got a small taste of Kentucky. Prisoners were expected to follow 10 rules made by Commandant William Pearson that dealt mainly with when and where they could go outside their block when the lights were out to be extinguished, when they were in bed. The deadline was 8 feet from the stockade wall, marked with stakes, and you could not cross it. The 10th rule stated that any prisoner failing to obey the first 9 rules would be shot, and this would happen on several occasions. In January of 1864, the Commandant William J. Pearson was replaced because of his cruelty to the prisoners and his inability to handle problems. On January 15, 1864, Brigadier General Harry D. Terry replaced Pearson. A few months later, Lieutenant Colonel Charles W. Hill took command. Letter writing was a major pastime, and there were strict rules to follow. You were only allowed to use a half a sheet of paper, and if you received one that was longer, it was removed from the envelope, and you were to notify the sender not to do so again, or you'd be blacklisted and you couldn't get any mail. They started bribing the guards, which required them to pay 2.5 cents per page to be read, and they could let longer letters go through. Packages were opened and items removed before the prisoners got them. You had to have the permission of the commander if you were requesting money. They kept diaries, journals, and autograph books, and they spent time talking about the war to others and hearing the latest news from the fresh fish or the newly captured men. They played baseball, checkers, garden, sketch, and often designing outfits so that they could pose as a guard and escape. They made trinkets, rings, and buttons from gutta percha, which is hard rubber. And we know that Colonel Fraser's autograph book is in the archive at Johnson's Island, and I think that's on my bucket list to go and see. I just think that would be crazy to see that. I can imagine. One of the things that they did to pass the time away is they did little plays and they did little skits. So they came up with the Southern Cross drill, and I'm going to pass this around so that you can see it. This is the original copy of the Southern Cross drill. The Southern Cross drill was written by Lieutenant Dugan of South Carolina as a way to fight boredom. It was composed of 16 couples. The music was furnished by Captain S.A. Munson of Memphis, Tennessee, who played the violin, and John McBrook with his guitar. In later years, the dance would be performed at Confederate reunions, only this time the veterans would have debutantes dressed in white with a Southern Cross draped across their bosom as their escorts. And among the things that I collected from Junior Fraser Boyle, this is a book. I think it is amazing that all these things have come from different places and all come back together because they belong together. And this is a little booklet that actually gives the steps. The big sheet that you saw, if you open it up, that's the music. So we have the music and the steps to do the Southern Cross of Honor. There were 4 sets of couples each, and the sets formed figures simultaneously. It ends with the figure of the Southern Cross as seen on the battle flag. The prisoners endured harsh winters, lack of food, fuel, and shortages. They didn't have very much wood for the stove, as well as increasingly filthy living conditions. Because the well pumps froze, prisoners were allowed to go to the water's edge and scoop water. Snowball fights were a popular winter pastime. This is the man that started it all. This is Virginia's father, Colonel Charles Wesley Fraser. The Confederate dead are buried outside the prison, and one day Colonel McLean was heading to the gate to perform a burial when he saw Colonel C.W. Fraser watching a lady with an infant on the veranda of the Federal barracks outside. Seeing McLean, Colonel Fraser fell in with the squad. When the lady saw what happened, she rushed to Colonel Fraser. A bayonet was thrust between them as they attempted to embrace. "But she's my wife," he stated, to no avail. "Our orders are imperative," replied the guard. And then the baby, who was Virginia, reached out and she grasped the bayonet's point. These were the same fingers that were destined to hold the hearts of both the South and the North in her grasp. Colonel Fraser was captured in September of 1863 and remained until the release on June 11, 1865. There were many escape attempts made by the Confederates, some successful, some weren't. They rushed the gate when supply wagons would arrive. They scaled the stockade walls. They posed as guards and tunneled out. They crossed the frozen Lake Erie to the Marblehead Peninsula. But one of the most famous and daring escape attempts happened in September of 1864. There was a mass breakout that was attempted. The USS Michigan was anchored off the shore of Sandusky Bay, and it was equipped with cannons, so it provided protection. It had 14 cannons, and it was the only gunboat on the Great Lakes. Privateer John Yates Beale commandeered the ferry Buffalo Parsons so that they could cross Lake Erie. Confederate Charles Cole pretended to be a wealthy businessman from Pennsylvania so he could gain the trust of the pilot. Cole's job was to drug them in and take command of the ship. He could use the guns on the prison and force the commandant to release the prisoners. Then confiscated boats would take the prisoners across the Bay to freedom. Unfortunately for the prisoners, there was a spy in their midst, and Cole was captured before he could put his plan into action. There were only 12 successful escapes in 40 months. Besides escaping, you could leave by exchange or parole or by taking the oath of allegiance to the United States. The prisoner had to apply, and they were placed in a separate block for their safety. Until 1865, only a few prisoners took the oath because of their fierce loyalty and devotion to the Confederacy. In the spring of 1865, Many prisoners took the oath because they felt like the cause that they had fought so hard for was dead. Tom Wallace said that swallowing the eagle was not done without a lot of soul searching. I refused to take the oath until I heard the surrender of Johnson, and then I thought it worse than foolish to wait any longer. The cause that I have espoused for 4 years has been true to in thought and action, as any man could be, is now undoubtedly dead. Consequently, I think the best thing I can do is to become a quiet citizen of the United States. The prisoners were paroled in alphabetical order, and the last Confederate prisoner left Johnson's Island on September 5th of 1865. The buildings were dismantled, the lumber and other furnishings were sold, and the island was returned back to Mr. Johnson. And I have some things because on May 29th in 1901, the Southern Cross drill was performed for the SCB ball in Memphis, Tennessee, and I have a program from the ball in 1901, and then I have a copy of an article that appeared in the Commercial Appeal, and it shows the debutantes in their white dresses with the Confederate flag on their bosom. And on July 3rd of 1905, the war drama of Johnson's Island was presented to the benefit of the General Force Monument by Company A Confederate veterans. And I have the playbill for that, and for 75 cents, you can see a whole collection of skits, songs, dances, but this is probably the most important thing you're going to see tonight, because this is the original script, written, typed in Virginia's, she typed it, and then it's got handwritten corrections in her own handwriting, and it tells what person is playing what part and everything, so I really wanted y'all to see that. In 1907, a little book was written, and it was called The History of the Southern Cross Drill. It was written by Miss Joseph Gray, and this is the book. And in June 8th of 1910, there was a monument honoring the prisoners of Johnson's Island was dedicated. It was called The Lookout, and was designed by Sir Moses Ezekiel, who designed the Confederate Monument in Arlington. And these are some postcards that just show the monument. I have a poem by Virginia Fraser Boyle, who wrote hundreds of poems, and this one she wrote is The Dead at Johnson's Island. And if you'll bear with me just a minute, I would like to read, actually, I'm going to read 2 poems. One long one very short. But they were both written while they were in prison on Johnson's Island, so I think it kind of sets the tone for what the men were thinking and what they were going through. The first poem I'm going to read is The Prison on Lake Erie, written by Major George McKnight, when he was in prison at Johnson's Island. And it goes, in God's blue bend, the full round moon glides o'er her bath so sweetly. Deep shadows creep, fade with light. The stars look down serenely. I sit and gaze out on the scene, a scene so sad and dreary. I think of weary captain's thoughts in prison on Lake Erie. The happy days of youth flit by me fast and faster, the days which gave no warning note of manhood's dire disaster, the days when peace and joy is home, and firesides bright and cozy come back and mock me, sad and worn, a captive on Lake Erie. A passing cloud fits o'er the view, a light, a moment vanished, restarts again, but now alas, the vision bright has vanished. The blissful scenes of childhood gone, leave but the view so dreary, to rest the aching eyes upon the prison on Lake Erie. How many moons shall rise and wane? How many dear days shall languish? Ere peace the white-winged angel comes to soothe the people's anguish. God sped the longed-for, prayed-for day when loved ones bright and cheery will welcome us around the hearth from the prison on Lake Erie. The last little poem is in the history of Johnson's Island, and it's a farewell to Johnson's Island. So I kind of thought that was a fitting way to end this speech. And this was written in an autograph book to Union Major Schofield by a young prisoner from Florida. Hoarse sounding billows the white-capped lake that against the barriers of our hated prison break. Farewell, farewell, thy giant island sea, thou too subservient to the modes of tyranny. Girding the island, waking the lonely shore, with morning echoes of thy melancholy roar. Farewell, thy lake, farewell, inhospitable land. Thou hast the curses of this patriot hand. I'll save the spot, the holy sacred bed, where sleep in peace our southern warriors dead. The last little thing that I have is just some correspondence. Would be my guess around 1910. There are no year dates on it, but these are letters Virginia Fraser Boyle is corresponding with the Robert Patton chapter UDC in Ohio, and it pertains to the monument and to the Confederate cemetery. So if you just want to kind of poke around at those, it's just a little addition to what I have. Does anybody have any questions?
How many dead were there? How many of them died?
They said of around 230 actually died. It was unusual in the prison because they always had fresh water. Even when the pumps froze, then they could go to the lake and get fresh water. So that was a part of the sanitary problems in other prisons. There was no fresh running water, and that led to typhoid and all those things like that.
My wife's great-great-grandfather was captured at Fort Donelson. And he just been in 3 weeks, and he was a colonel or something like that. And he got caught and sent to Johnson's Island.
Wow.
They traded him out in like 90 days or something.
Right.
And he's from Red Bay, Alabama. He went back home and become a doctor. That he wasn't gonna fight anymore.
Well, the time that they stayed in was very short in the beginning, but as the war got on, there were less and less prisoner exchanges, and so and a lot more lack of communication and things. There was a whole lot of reasons that there was the parole stop, but it was basically more so as a punishment. You can't have them back because they knew that they were going to re-enlist and go back to fighting, so they just decided to hold on to them.
Dore, where was Confederate Hall in Memphis?
In Memphis, it was on Union Avenue, right there.
Is it where the Scottish Rite building is now?
No, it was a little further up, I believe. Because the Scottish Rite is directly across from the Forest Park.
Yeah, that's
And it
right.
will always be Forest Park.
We did a dance and dinner there a few years ago.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Johnson Island was a lot more humane POW camp than like
Andersonville.
Andrew,
something
oh,
like
well, yeah, that,
Camp Douglas.
Camp Douglas,
that. I just think it was supposed to be
It's a-
higher class
there's an
because,
island up there, on the Mississippi River that, I read a book about, and it was pretty rough up there.
Uh-huh.
But,
Well,
all of them had a deadline, and if you crossed that deadline, you was automatically shot.
exactly.
That was down at Andersonville, I've been down there, and, they said that was one of the most brutal POW camps there was. But, you know, what else could they do?
Right. Well, a
They-
lot of they're punishing our soldiers because their soldiers didn't have food, but they cut off the supply line, so there was no food to be had.
Right.
And so it was kind of a snowball effect.
Well, the commandant down in Andersonville, he sent, I think it was 5 officers up to try and negotiate for the Union to send food down to Andersonville for the POWs only. And, they wouldn't do that either.
Well, one of the little stories that came out of my speech on Virginia Fraser Boyle was the fact that when Colonel Fraser was captured, his wife and thus Virginia followed him. They lived with a Copperhead family in Sandusky, Ohio, and when the Lake Erie would freeze, they would pull Virginia on a sled over to the prison, but she went to the prison every day, and she would stand on the parapet with a pair of opera glasses, and she would try to see him. So a priest came out one day, and he told her that Colonel Fraser was dying, that he needed fresh food, good nutrition and warm clothes, and so she didn't know what to do, so she got on a train and she went to Washington, and she sat out inside Lincoln's office for 3 days before he would see her, and he kept telling her, send her away, I don't have time for her to go, and she would not leave. And so he finally granted her an audience. He gave her a pass where she was able to take fresh food and vegetables and some warm clothes. But the prison commandant took the coat and he took the blankets, but he did allow him to have enough food. And that was just enough food for him to get well enough to survive, to be paroled at the end of the war. Without that, he would have died. And so he called Lincoln a demigod, but he also told Virginia to never forget what he did for him.
Well, tell the people here all of this stuff that you got on this voles that you did a program down at the Wingfall Grazing
Right.
Collierville here, probably about 2 years ago, something like that.
Well, it all started, I guess, about 10 years ago. I got a call from the UDC office in Richmond, and they said, do you have period clothes? Yes. Would you be willing to read for somebody? And I'm like, read what? And they said, we don't know. Just talk to me. Find out. And I'm like, well, sure. And so they put me in touch with a man called Mr. Walter Scholes, and he was from Maine. And he was from the Dead Poets Society, which just cracked me up because I thought that was something made up for TV. But evidently there is a real society, and he was going around the country and he was documenting little known or forgotten poets. So he says, can you read something for Virginia Fraser Boyle? And I'm like, sure. Like, who is she? You know, and the shame came on me because she was buried in my own backyard and I didn't know who she was. She's buried in one cemetery, has a very big monument. She's within sight of our yearly memorial service. She's right next to where all the soldiers are buried. But I was like, I didn't know who she was. And then I started researching her, and I was like, she wrote the inscription on the Forest Equestrian Monument. She wrote hundreds and hundreds of poems. She wrote odes to Jefferson Davis and Sam Davis and Patrick Cleburne, I mean, just tons and tons of things. And so I was like, this is so cool. So he came and he filmed me, and I read the tattoo for him, which was really cool because I'm standing at her grave reading this that she wrote. So it's kind of very humbling, I guess, in a way. But then somebody, I was telling her, oh, did you know? And they said, well, did you know that Steve McFarland is related to her? You need to go see what he has. So I went, he let me come over and see what he had. And I was just amazed because, I mean, literally there's a wreath and a frame of laurel leaves that Jefferson Davis made with his own hands. And he put it on her head when she was 10 years old. She read a poem and he said, you're the poet of the Confederacy. And so it was like, I have that. Me, you know, I'm just nobody and I have this. But I told Steve at that time, if you ever want to sell this, you call me first. I know how it's gonna pay for it, but I'm like, you call me first. Well, God works in a mysterious way, and I ended up divorced with a lot of money that I didn't answer to how I could spend. And no, it was 2 weeks after the divorce, Steve calls me up and says, I'm ready to sell. And I'm like, I will be right there. And so off I go. And he was showing me what he had. It just amazes me what he had. And I mean, her big portrait, he's got her graduation announcements from Miss Hisby's finishing school. I mean, it's just the amount. There are first edition copies. I have Mary Forrest Bradley's personal autographed copy. I have one that she autographed to Clement Evans, Colonel Clement Evans, which was Colonel Fraser's best friend. I have a one and only copy of Love Songs and Bugle Calls, which was a collection of poems that Toof in Memphis, Tennessee printed, and it's in green velvet cover, and it has her name on it, and it's one. There's only one. I have all her reunion ribbons. I have her 24-karat gold Poet Laureate's pen. I have the last purchase was an autograph book, which I'm like, I'm okay with that. And he's like, you need to come see this. I'm like, nah. And then I thought, yeah, I'll go see it. Oh yeah, I walked away with it because it has first ladies, it has foreign dignitaries, it has Mark Twain, it has Marina Howe Davis, it has Jefferson Davis's autograph. It's crazy. I was like, yes, you're right, Steve, I have to have this. And it has her name in gold leaf on the front. So, and it's files of poems, with corrections in her handwriting. Most of them are typed, some of them are handwritten. There's correspondence relating to all the poems, and her, she was printed in numerous magazines when she was 12 or 14, I can't think. She submitted a poem to Harper's Weekly and they published it, and they sent her a check for $75. And her grandmother made her send it back because she said, Virginia, that is terrible. No gentlewoman ever takes money for menial labor. Like, you can't do that. So she got a pseudonym, and she started publishing under that, so that there was never a question. But they didn't know what to do with the money because they sent it back, and they sent it back to them. They said, we don't publish anything we don't pay for. So they ended up donating the check to Porter Lee in Memphis. So Virginia's a whole story unto herself, but that's how this fascination with Johnson's Island kind of came about, because I was like, I don't know anything about Johnson's Island, and so when I started researching and I started reading the poems and the letters, it makes it very personal, but it was like, this is really interesting in and of itself. just the prison part. So it's just one little offshoot of everything, that I've had. And a lot of the stuff that I told you is not facts that are published on the internet or in a book, because these books are long gone. You know, the history of the Southern Cross Drill tells a lot about Johnson's Island. So does the Poor Johnny's little booklet. And it's personal first-hand account, so that's not something that you're gonna see, you know, other places, or not very easily attainable. So, I'm honored and I'm humbled that these belong to me, but that's my point to you, is to share it with you, and that's why I feel like it's so important to bring you the real things. Now, he gets upset, I think, Joe, but you're just gonna come off the wall again, and he freaks out. But, it's important that you see the real thing, I think, so.
We sure would like to have a program on that one of these days.
Well, now that I've told you half of it, but I'd be glad to bring it back.
The rest of it would be a breeze.
Yeah, just because it's actually, just seeing the real thing. You know, he knows the person that has her purse, and she won't give it up. But, I'd be really curious, but he came through it when he had a relative die, and so they said, well, what do you want, Steve? And he said, how about that trunk over there? Well, he knew what was in that trunk, and so he took the trunk, and that's where all this artifacts were, and all the reunion ribbons, and he carefully put them all back together, and it just, so I have a big pile of stuff. But it's amazing, honestly, that much stuff has come back together from one person. But I would be glad to come back.
Okay, all right.
Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there on the internet, a list of all the prisoners that were interred there at Johnson's? I cannot find
That are
that complete
interred?
list. I mean, no, that
They were-
have served there.
Okay, there is one, but I do know that it is not correct, because Colonel Frazier's not on there. And we know, you know, from letters and things that he was interred there. So, no, it's not, and it's kind of funny because they have his autograph book, but yet he's not on the list. So, that's kind of one of the things I hope to accomplish with the trip to Sandusky, is they have a museum, and I would like to give them what I have pertaining to Johnson's Island, or copies of what I have, in exchange for seeing his autograph.
Yeah.
Or maybe getting a copy of his autograph.
So I've tried to find the list to look for an ancestor, and I can't find a complete list. It just kind of ends in the B's, and that's it.
Right, that's what I'm saying, it's not a complete list. And I think it's just, that in the war, they just didn't care, you know, and it didn't matter to them because it was Southern and it was Confederate. It wasn't their own men, so they just really were negligent about it. You know, we know that trying to find information on our ancestors is difficult because so many courthouses burned. They destroyed so many records. Well, we didn't do that to them, but they just didn't have the same care about things that, and of course, who knew it was gonna be that important 150 years later, but,
Dore, you mentioned a while ago Company A, the Confederate Veterans
Uh-huh.
Campus. Have you ever run across a hard copy photograph of them anywhere?
yes, sir.
You got one?
Well, I
Or
don't,
have, know where one is?
Steve has one. See, and that's what confused me. Once again, everything is like, goes off in all these little directions, because I also researched Black Confederate Preston Roberts. He's another program I have, but he was a part of Company A, and so I am looking at all these Tennessee regiments, and I'm trying to find a Company A. Well, Company A was a UCV company. It was after the war, it wasn't, so I was like looking in the whole wrong place, trying to find records on Preston.
The reason I was asking, a couple of weeks ago, I found a picture of them in the 1919 newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
and they carried with them the 51st Tennessee flag to the
Wow.
reunions. That's the same flag as up here at the Shiloh Visitor Center.
Well, I take all offers of anything that pertains to this, because I think I started not to take the points that pertain to Lincoln. And that was, and I held off for a long time, and finally I decided that I don't like that. It makes me unhappy, but it is a part of the whole picture. And Virginia spent a lot of time trying to heal the wounds and trying to get everybody reconciled and stuff. So she spent a lot of time in New York, but it's, you know, that goes against my Southern nature. But you know, she was a Southern girl too, and she's probably did the good thing, because just like Lee, you know, like we've got to move, we've got to get past this, we've got to move on, we've got to make a life for ourselves. So.
Did she live in Memphis
She
most all her
did,
life?
right, she did, that's a part of my Virginia speech, but yes, I actually have addresses for her, and the houses where she lived, and she was good friends with Jefferson Davis, her family was, so when he lived in Memphis for a short time, that was a good time for them to reconnect, but they, actually, when she read the poem, she was at Beauvoir, where she read the poem. And we did that little scan on your phone where you can tell what a plant is, and we did and it is a laurel reed, a laurel leaf reed, and that's real prominent in southern, on the ocean. So. Well, I'm just gonna say thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Y'all come back anytime.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad you didn't judge us by Bobby.
Well, I love you too.
No.